Hi everyone! Today I'm going to be working on this drawing of a white pumpkin with colored pencils. I'm working with Prismacolor, Polychromos, Luminance, and also Derwent drawing and Derwent light fast pencils. And I'm drawing this on museum mount board, which is my new favorite surface to draw on. The brand for that is called Rising. You can see me getting started here. I'm using the Luminance buff titanium to outline the pumpkin, making sure I get all of those curved sections in there just right. Want to make sure I get the 3D shape for this pumpkin established. Here, as I'm blocking in my highlights with a white pencil, you can see me using that black light flashlight, which helps me see where I'm placing my white highlights on the white paper. Otherwise, it's just really hard to see white on white. I like to lay down a layer of the white pencil anywhere in the drawing where I can see highlights. That way, when I come over later with more colors, the pencils won't stick to those areas near as well, and it'll help me maintain the highlights in those areas without too much effort. Here I'm using a Prismacolor white to go through and just indent the paper all over, just some little dots and dashes just to establish some texture underneath. Now I'm coming through with the shadow colors, and because this is a white pumpkin, the shadow colors might not necessarily be what you think of as shadows. These are still pretty light colors. I'm using a Prismacolor peach beige and also a Prismacolor seashell pink. And then later I'm going to come through and add some French grays to these shadows, but I wanted to build the shadows slowly because it's a white pumpkin. I don't want to make the mistake of going too dark too soon with those shadows. I'm using a very light pressure here as well. And just working my way through the drawing what I see and placing the shadows where I can see them on the reference image. So just continuing to work my way around the pumpkin. You'll also notice that I make sure that the direction that my pencil is being applied is in the direction of the lines of those pumpkins. I want to make sure I have plenty of shape. Here I'm adding some shadow underneath the pumpkin. It was a little bit hard to judge the values for those shadow areas at the bottom without getting these darker shadows underneath the pumpkin drawn in. I don't typically do this, but for this white pumpkin, it really helped me a lot. Really helped give shape to the bottom part of this pumpkin. I am going to be adding a background to this later. This is just part one of this video, so I will be working even more on those shadows underneath the pumpkin in that video. So now I'm coming through and just starting to increase the value of those shadows. Before I come through with the midtones, I put the really light layers down first and just building my way up. I'm also coming through with, that's a Derwent light fast light bronze pencil, to just add again some more dots and dashes similar to what I did with the white pencil. It really helps to add detail and interest to the drawing. These spots on here will look as though they kind of are coming from underneath because I am going to put layers of pencil on top of them. And it's just, again, a really easy way to add detail. I'm not careful to make sure that all of those spots are going in the exact place that I see them on the reference. I'm just trying to mimic the reference without making it perfect. And now I'm coming through and adding the midtones or the rest of the layers, using a peach Prismacolor to bump up the colors there a little bit. That's a Naples ochre from Luminance. It's a little bit more of a yellow, a creamy yellow. The combination of the peach and that Naples ochre gives a little bit of a glow to the pumpkin. And here's the buff titanium from Luminance, which is really the main color that you see when you look at this pumpkin. It's just a really light, creamy tan. And I just filled everything in with that pencil. I think there's at least a layer of that pencil in every area of this drawing. I'm here increasing that shadow even more. Took me several layers and several different pencils to get that shadow exactly how I wanted it, and it's still not there yet. There's a Derwent drawing wheat pencil, which has, it's also a tan, kind of a yellowish, maybe a touch of a green tint to it. I used a lot of the Derwent drawing pencils in this drawing. They're very opaque and creamy, and they worked really well here. A little bit more of the Naples ochre. And more of that Derwent drawing wheat. That's the Derwent Light Fast. That's the light bronze pencil. And then blending that out with the Derwent Light Fast, or I'm sorry, Derwent drawing wheat. Get those two confused when I say them over and over together. So now that my first layers are on this pumpkin, I'm blending over everything using Gamsol odorless mineral spirits. It's a solvent that just dissolves the pencil pigment and makes my drawing look a little bit more like a painting. It smooths everything out, gets rid of any of the graininess you might have with the pencils. And I just make sure that I'm able to go over every part of the drawing with the Gamsol. In some of the drawings that I do, this is a lot more obvious. You can really see the difference between the areas that have been blended and the areas that haven't, but it's not showing up as much on here with these light colors. But I think you can see, there you can see that a little bit, the way it just sort of dissolves that graininess and creates a really nice smooth base layer for me to come back over with more layers of colored pencil, which is what I'm doing here. I let that dry for about 30 minutes before I come back through with more layers of pencil. You want to make sure the paper is really dry after you apply the Gamsol before you add more pencils. Once again, working on that shadow. Wanted to make sure I got it dark enough without making it too dark. If I went way too dark on that shadow, I could potentially ruin this drawing. So I built my shadows up really slowly, which is something that I'm not always as careful with. Sometimes you can go ahead and lay in a shadow really dark, but on a white drawing like this, I just had to build it up a little bit more slowly. You can see my highlights here standing out really nice. If you remember back to the very beginning of the drawing, I put those in first with the white pencil, and they're not white anymore because I did come over them with that buff titanium, but the buff titanium didn't stick near as much in those areas as it did on the rest of the pumpkin, so it just gives me a really nice transition between the highlighted areas and the midtones. Here I'm just adding a few more of those dots. That's my, I think that was my Prismacolor seashell. So now I'm moving on to the stem, And I'm starting off by indenting the paper with that really sharp, that's a Polychromos white pencil, and I also have an ivory pencil from Polychromos. Again, when I come over those areas with the colored pencils, in this case it'll be blacks and browns, the pencil won't stick in those areas where I put the white down, so it'll give me some really nice texture kind of underneath there. So now I'm working on the shadows. My process typically involves blocking in the highlights and then blocking in the shadows, and then you can really easily just come over everything with the midtones, and it just is a very intuitive way for me to work. Took me several years to figure out that that's what made sense to me. Definitely not the only way to do it though. That is a Derwent Light Fast Brown Ochre. I used a few different Derwent Light Fast pencils in here and a few different Derwent drawing as well. I used a chocolate brown, that brown ochre. I used a Venetian red pencil. I love drawing stems and bark. Again, I roughly use the reference as a guide, but you can really just have some fun when you're drawing stems and bark. It's all about the texture and the contrast. So just making sure you get those darks in there and you have some bright highlights, and then just start kind of splotching in some colors. Here I'm using that black flashlight again so that I could see where I had put that white pencil, and I can draw my shadows around it. So now coming back through and starting to fill everything in with the midtones. More of that brown ochre. I use some of the light bronze as well. The Derwent pencils translate between, well, it's all the same brand. I guess they translate between products. So for instance, the Derwent Drawing Wheat is going to be the same color as the Derwent Light Fast Wheat, but the pencils just have different characteristics. So sometimes I'll end up using both in my drawings. There's a little bit of French gray from Prismacolor. And continue to work through there. Now coming through and filling in the midtones. Honestly, you could use any browns on this. Just pick a few different ones, make sure they look good together. And now I'm coming through and blending this with Gamsol. I was careful on this part not to paint the Gamsol on. I more dabbed it on because I don't want to lose that texture that I created by smoothing things out too much. So I just kind of dabbed the Gamsol around to dissolve the pigment. And now coming back through with my final layers on the stem. At this point, I was just focusing on getting a few different colors in here, lots of variety in the texture, and also focusing on making sure that I had the shape right and that I had some highlights. I came through with the white pencil and added some dots and some highlights. I also used more of that buff titanium as well. And that can really make a big difference. And just keep working on it until you're happy with it, basically. Mine does not look exactly like the reference image, but it's close enough that I'm happy with it. And here is the final drawing. I've also created 3 real-time tutorials over on Patreon if you're interested in seeing me draw that entire pumpkin in real time. I also have over 100 other video tutorials over on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, you can go take a look. It is currently $7 a month for immediate access to all of those different videos. I have things for beginners as well as more advanced artists. And I will be back here next week with another video. I'm going to show you how I draw the background for this one. Bye guys!